Hi, my name is Caitlin Chapman, and I chose to do my web of causation on PTSD caused from sexual abuse in children and adolescents. Okay, so the introduction. The problem being addressed is PTSD in children and adolescents who have experienced some degree of sexual abuse. What is PTSD? Well, PTSD is defined in the DSM-5 as a traumatic event that causes threat to the integrity of the person or others with a reaction of the individual characterized by intense fear, helplessness, or horror. Some symptoms of this could be fear, worry, sadness, anger, feeling alone. I won't discuss everything. I'll let you kind of read through the slide while I discuss some key points. But symptoms can present themselves also in child's play by showing aggression or out-of-place sexual behaviors and self-harm. The diagnosis for PTSD is having 2 or more symptoms lasting more than 1 month following exposure to the traumatic event. Okay, so the rate and prevalence of PTSD among general population in the USA was 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some type of traumatic event at least once in their lives, and then up to 20% of that population go on to develop PTSD. The rate of prevalence among my specific population was children who are sexually abused are a significantly higher risk for later developing PTSD symptoms and PTSD. About 5% of adolescents have met criteria for PTSD in their lifetime, and the prevalence is much higher for girls, 8% versus 2.3% for boys. I'll give you time to read some stuff over the slide. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss the determinants relating to PTSD in children who have been sexually abused. And the first determinant is socioeconomic status. The article relating to the SES found that sexual abuse is more likely to occur in high-income areas. An estimated 5 to 10% of girls and 1 to 5% of boys are actually more likely to be exposed to penetrative sexual abuse during childhood. In addition to this, even higher prevalence rates of any form of sexual abuse included. This isn't to say that children in poverty are not affected by sexual abuse. The researchers found that physical violence is actually the highest form of abuse experienced by poverty-stricken children. The next determinant was intellectual disabilities. And the research showed that children who have an intellectual disability are more likely to be at risk for sexual abuse and frequent repeated abuse leading to PTSD. However, research did conclude that if the PTSD experienced in children, with intellectual abilities is not more severe or is more severe. So no evidence indicated that children with intellectual abilities had any kind of more severe symptoms. It was all the same. Okay, now for the third determinant, incarcerated juveniles. Adolescents who are incarcerated are at a higher risk of experiencing sexual abuse as well, while in juvenile facilities from male and female perpetrators. Youth who reported more than 1 incident of misconduct with more than 1 incident further then reported more than 11 incidents of staff sexual abuse. So for every child or adolescent who reported 1 incident, later on disclosed that it had been almost 11 incidents of staff sexual abuse. So over 40% of youth said that staff was the instigator for the sexual contact, which I found to be very interesting, especially coming from female officers. Okay, and then the next determinant would be perpetrators, which are in-home and outside of the home. And research suggested that child abuse cases are actually more likely to result from a family member being the perpetrator. The literature is inconsistent, however, regarding the weight of the identity of the offender on the long-term negative psychological effects. However, research did predict that when a perpetrator is a family member, PTSD symptoms can be more prevalent because the abuse relates to a person in which they trusted. Okay, so the next determinant I found was the history of sexual abuse, and this just simply stated that actually having a history of sexual abuse makes you at a higher risk to develop PTSD caused by sexual abuse because you are more likely for re-victimization, which is just simply stating that if you've experienced sexual abuse once as a child, you're more than likely to continue to experience it until an intervention or something has happened to stop the abuse. One of the next determinants I'm going to talk about is gender. And for the determinants of gender, the literature found that girls are more prone to sexual abuse and later to develop PTSD symptoms than boys. So sexual abuse exposure has been linked to the likelihood of PTSD diagnosis for female youth, and it is shown that female children are more likely to suffer from PTSD symptoms later in life. Okay, and the next two determinants I found was culture. And in the research, I found that although all cultures and races can experience sexual abuse, Native Americans tended to be at a higher risk of rape or sexual assault because they tend to experience trauma at higher rates, and they are more likely to experience symptoms of PTSD and other psychological and cognitive consequences stemming from sexual abuse and trauma. So again, that's not to say that the only culture that experiences sexual abuse and PTSD is Native Americans. They are just at a higher risk. And I did not find the research behind this, so I'm not sure what the causation of it was, but I'm assuming that it has to do something with the tight-knit community that they have. Maybe it happens within tribes, maybe some kind of rituals related to this. I'm not sure, but that's what I would assume. Okay, now I'm going to speak about sexual identity, and I found it very interesting because I never have heard of your sexual identity puts you at a higher risk for a type of abuse, but the research did find that children who identify as sexual or as homosexual do tend to have higher rates of sexual abuse when they are a child. So the literature also found that adult LGBTQ survivors of childhood sexual abuse often experience unique clinical challenges or PTSD while they are healing from this type of childhood trauma. Okay, this is my web of causation, and I'm just going to briefly explain what's going on here. So in the middle is my topic, and you can see there are 8 outliers. The big circles are related to my determinants, and on some of these there are smaller subsections. For example, I'll explain gender. So for gender, I spoke about how males and females can both be victims of sexual abuse and later resulting in PTSD. However, it was shown that females were at a higher risk. So for all the higher risk subsections underneath the determinants, I drew a red arrow, although other factors can still be affected by, although all the other factors such as heterosexuals, lower income, family members, non-family members can all still be victims of sexual abuse and later life PTSD. Okay, so as a social worker, I think it's imperative to assure that the sexual abuse victims seek out the appropriate resources, such as counseling, therapy, etc., to help address the trauma related to PTSD and the symptoms as soon as possible. And again, I'm just going to go over the key points, so feel free to read over the slide as I'm talking. I think as a social worker, we have an ethical obligation to participate in any kind of continuing education. This could be through seminars, trainings, research, consulting with coworkers to ensure that we are staying up to date on new therapeutic practices and interventions relating to the populations in which we're working with. So one of the community-based programs I found was Safe Horizon, and the population group that it targeted was any child or adult who has been affected by sexual abuse. And the goals of this community-based program was to heal and recover the body, mind, and spirit after a child or adult has experienced some kind of sexual abuse. And Safe Horizon provides individual and group counseling workshops, support, and practical assistance and information to victims in sexual assault and their families. Currently, I did not find any literature revealing if the community program has been effective. However, research did show that the methods, Safe Horizon practices are effective in the prevention of PTSD later in life and helping one to overcome the traumatic experience. And one of the laws that I found relating to my topic, or somewhat relating, was Aaron's Law, HB 406. And the population that it targeted was children grades kindergarten through 12. And basically in Georgia, this was just it was basically a new class which should be implemented within all schools, and the goals are to provide age-appropriate courses on sexual abuse and assault awareness and prevention education. Basically, it's just a manual setting out the dates and details of the course, and it should be approved by any kind of state school superintendent that's in cooperation with the Department of Public Health or the State Board of Education and such expert advisors as they may choose. However, I did not find any kind of data suggesting that a specific law or policy has been tested for its effectiveness as of this year. Okay, and to kind of conclude my web of causation and my project, I'll go over some key points that I found were the most important, which were children who are sexually abused are at a significantly greater risk for later post-traumatic stress and other anxiety symptoms. PTSD really can relate to anyone, and I listed my 8 determinants there that I discussed earlier. Research did show that it is important to seek therapeutic help as soon as possible after a sexual trauma has occurred to help prevent severe PTSD from trauma later in life. And I think that's very important because even if it's not sexual abuse, any kind of trauma that the client experienced needs to be addressed as soon as possible to prevent further psychological issues, which can occur not immediately but later in life. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and if I went over anything too fast or you feel like I missed anything, feel free to go back over my slideshow and read everything yourself or listen again. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.